Hello. Ohayou gozaimasu. Hello and welcome to the Spinach Tadwick 2024 conference. This session is SYM02, the Back to Basics Skillshare, and I'm your moderator, Emily Breaker. This year's meeting was made possible in part by the generosity of our sponsors, especially our diamond sponsors. We are grateful to them and to the Oki Congress for today's tech support. I have a script to read, with some housekeeping items before we begin, so I'll just go through these fairly quickly. Each presenter will talk for 10 minutes. There will be 3 minutes of questions at the end of each presentation, followed by 2 minutes of transition time. If you are attending virtually online, please do ask questions of the speakers using the chat feature in Zoom, and I'll relay them after each talk. The chat function is intended for technical questions or for conversing with other attendees about topics being presented. So please do use this feature judiciously, as any inappropriate use of the chat may result in your being removed from the session or the chat function being disabled. And by participating in this conference, you agreed to abide by the Spinach Tadwig 2024 Code of Conduct. For those of you here in person, we do request that when you ask questions, you speak into the microphone so that our online audience can hear your question. And this session will be recorded for later viewing and posted to the Spinach and Tadwig YouTube. So if you don't catch every session you'd like to, you'll be able to see it online later. And with that, please enjoy this session. I'll introduce our first speaker, Ueda, who will be talking on deciphering Japanese labels on old natural history specimens. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing me. So hi, I'm Hirochika Ueda. So today I'm talking about the labels on the old natural history specimen in Japanese. So today the collection I will be talking about today is the Takashi Kurobe's rock and mineral collections. It contains the rock and mineral fossils over the 800 specimens, and which is stored in the soil science laboratory of the Tokyo University of Agriculture and Technology. In this collection, 272 specimens may be collected by the teachers, students, and other associates in the university. But they have very hard readable handwritten labels in Japanese. So all the specimens were used used to geological and petrological classes in the university, but they are no longer used now. So to find out the new way to use them, they came to the university museum I belong to. So and the digital archiving project was started with the curator course student. The older specimens were already archived and published in our museum archives on the internet now. So I was talking about today is the process and the problems on the digitization of these labels during this project. Basically, the data on where and when and who collected the specimen collected is the principal data of the to guarantee the scientific value of the specimens, of course. So in Japan, the natural history specimens were started to collect it in the Meiji era about 150 years ago. And the geological specimens such as the mineral and rocks were collected in earnest to grasp the natural resources in Japan. So at this time, Meiji era. So the specimen we are talking about the collected in the also Meiji era. But such historical specimens have Japanese labels. Mostly Japanese are in cursive script. So the Japanese is one of the most difficult language in the world. So that they have having many letters and logographs. For example, hiragana and katakana have the 48 letters, and also the more than 10,000 characters in the Chinese character kanji. And also, alphabets were used to describe the specimen's description. So, and further, the alphabets were used to express the Romanized Japanese and also the foreign language such as English and German. So, for example, maybe you can see these words are completely different words, but actually all of them refer to the geology. So, furthermore, the old Japanese museum novels are often handwritten, showing the extreme cursive script. So these letters and characters in cursive script were used in combination, making it crazy difficult to read, even for native Japanese speakers like me. Yeah, I can't read it. So there are some reassuring tools to read such a hard-readable Japanese novels. One of them, this one, is a database of the such cursive script kanji. For example, this is kanji meaning the island, and the database showing the cursive script of this kanji. However, this database have a very big problem, which is if we don't have any candidate of the original kanji, we can't search in this database. So another tool to read old Japanese novel is Mio, this one. This application is this is an application for AI recognition of the kanji's cursive script. But however, like this example, AI often suggests the wrong kanji, so the accuracy of the AI is still low. Okay. In such situations, so I will talk about the how we recognize the original old Japanese novels in the Kurobe's collection. So first one is this specimen. So this novel shows the 5 letters, and there is no date record, and also the collector's name. So the letters may telling the original locality of the specimen. So, however, firstly, we cannot read this cursive script. It's extremely cursive. So, if I forced to recognize, I could read like this one, but I have no confidence at all. So this level, I turn to the 5 attention to the specimen itself. So actually, I'm a journalist, so I have seen this type of blogs. This has many pores with weathering yellowish minerals. So I realized this type is rock. This rock is boninite, yielding from the Bonin Island. So boninite is a specific rock from the Bonin Island in Japan. So given it such this is a boninite, I realized that the rubber is I could able to decipher the original labels. This one. So the name in here right side indicates the Ani and Jima, and the right side, left side is the Takinora. So this label indicates the Anijima Island and Takinora Bay. So here now. So this is the case where the specimen itself is the most important sources of the specimen's information. So, okay. So the next So next case is a limestone specimen with a very fragmentary locality information. In the Corbett collection, 21 specimens showing the fragmented locality information. Some of them cannot read because of the very cursive script. So these limestone specimens were similar to each other, and some of them include the Fuzulina fossils, so which indicating that these limestone is Permian or Carboniferous limestone. So all of the locality names were written in Japanese, but very detailed location. So we cannot where they are. So also I continued the advanced project. So I found the same location name in some labels with the more wider area information. So we can realize that this locality is in the Mount Kinsho, which is a very famous fossil locality in Japan. And furthermore, one label in these limestone specimens has a collector's initial TW here, so which indicating that the famous geologist and pedologist Tetsugoro Wakimizu. So he is the first professor of the geology and soil science in the Tokyo Imperial University. So Wakimizu studied the Mount Kinsho and reported its geology several times. So the geology, and also showing the geological maps. In this map, there is many locality names matching the locality name on the Corbett collection. So based on this map, we can recognize that there is some where the specimen came from. So let's move to the discussion. So recent study showing the OCR function contribute to the digitization of Japanese labels. However, in our project, the cursive scripts are still difficult to read appropriately even for AI. So even if I try to digitize the specimen labels, the specimens themselves is the most important source of the information. And especially for the geological specimens, there is still the original locality still exists. So identifying the original locality and the collectors of the specimen, and also other specimens information is enabled to recover the scientific value of these specimens in our project. So as a result, it is still difficult to AI to determine the specimen data by integrating the levels, rock faces or structures, and also fossil species and other specimen information. So it will continue to rely on the experience and knowledge of the curators with AI in Japanese on the Japanese levels. Now, in the future, we are trying to improve the AI, of course, and also we try to correct the our digital archives by collaborating with expert of Japanese ancient documents. So this is the conclusion. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one question. If anyone has one, please step up to the mic. Were there any questions on the chat, Talia? No. All right. Thank you so much, Hiro.
Okay, thank you.
Just give us a minute. All right, our next speaker is Vanessa Rhue, who will be talking on vertebrate fossil collections on the move, considerations for planning a small to large scale collection relocation.
Thank you all for your attention about this very fun subject of moving. So for those who are very familiar with collections, when I get asked during tours for people that aren't familiar, they say, "What do you do as a paleontologist?" I said, "Really? I move things. And then once I move it again." So this is that story that we've been doing here at the Peabody for the past 4 years. And I'm going to go over some observations that hopefully will be good take-home messages for any of you who are in the midst of this at whatever scale you're doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the task was when I first onboarded at Yale 5 years ago, the process that we implemented, as well as just some takeaways and reflections. So taking you back into deep time, this is 1924, when the museum moved for its second time. It had been in New Haven, Connecticut, downtown, and what you're seeing here in 1924 is the construction of the building where it is now. And this will look a little bit familiar a few slides from now because the area on the bottom right there became our new collection storage space as a sub-basement just a couple of years ago. So history repeats itself. The scope of our project, given here by our monster cart, affectionately called, we had in 2019 to 2020, a team of folks that were dedicated to doing inventory and mapping of the spaces. And then we evacuated everything, like the whole building, from exhibits and collections, libraries, offices. And we had to do it again by reoccupying that space while we installed exhibits. So we had our work cut out for us. Some of the challenges and the constraints we were given were to keep these collections accessible throughout the duration of the project for research. So our graduate students have 24/7 access to these collections, and they're very heavily used on a daily basis. And we also host nearly 200 visiting researchers annually. So we certainly wanted to not impede the work for such a long period of time. And we needed to mobilize people in smaller teams during the pandemic to really achieve this. And so some of the guiding principles that we were aiming for, we did want to improve the arrangement as much as we could, but also mitigate the risk of data loss as things became shuffled between buildings. So this is probably the most text-heavy slide I have, and apologies for that. But I really wanted to list out some questions for you all to consider when you embark on this at whatever scale you're doing, as sort of an assessment and a survey of things to keep in mind. So what the storage equipment is that you currently have, whether or not you're going to be repurposing that in some fashion, in part, or in whole, will it be completely replaced? Other things about the volume. Be as detailed as you can in your pre-mapping. That's really what took a lot of my time, is understanding what we had, where it was, what the extent of that was, and how I was going to configure that into a new space. And then other constraints like infrastructure. So this right here, the photo on the left, you'll see again, you'll see all that overhead ductwork. That was my nemesis because I had drawings and plans, and then you'd go and ground truth it, and there'd be another pipe in the way, and we couldn't fit this compactor there, and that really kind of set us back to the drawing board on multiple times. So you do have to be pretty diligent and flexible at the same time. And then I'll skip down to the end here and say, what's the desired organization? Currently at Yale, for the vertebrate fossils, they're arranged in a systematic fashion. Other collections might be geochronostratigraphic, and if you're going to change that, do you have the time to do it in its entirety, or are you going to keep it the same? You want to, as much as possible, maintain one system of organization. So this is a bit of the storage assessment of the state of things when we moved. On the top left are some of the wooden drawers that have different heights you'll see in compactors. These were acquired in the 80s through an NSF grant. And they were very useful at the time to be able to efficiently store materials. And we decided we were going to repurpose them in our swing move, but they were going to become static. We had different types of shelving, open shelving, pallet racking, cabinets. We called these bottom right cabinets interior cabinets. They were fabulous, very modular, and allowed for us to swing things very easily and move them around. And we also had closed cabinetry in the center top there, which there's an ichthyosaur on the bottom, which in the last 30 years probably hadn't seen the light of day. We had to disassemble the cabinet to get it out. So things like this. You make use of space and equipment as much as you can in a museum setting. And apologies for the formatting here from a PC to a Mac. But you'll find that we were working with drawings of the spaces themselves, understanding what those dimensions were in the various rooms we were moving from. On the left is the previous basement configuration, and on the right are the spaces that we were moving into temporarily that weren't designed for collections, and it was an adjacent building. And so the goal was to find out where it all was going to go. And this is probably my favorite slide, because indeed, portions of each of these rooms were scattered into any place that we could fit them and maintain the organizational flow as much as possible for research. So it was a bit messy. And yet we did it. So we did out with old, and this is what those spaces looked like evacuated in the basement. To come in with the temporary and reset up some of our existing compactors as fixed units. And in that intervening time, I was telling a colleague this morning, I was like racking my brain, what did we do in 2022? Well, the whole museum got gutted. And so this is what was going on in 2022. Sometimes the pandemic makes things a little bit squozen together. But in this view here on the bottom, the yellow tarp that you see is actually the same perspective as that first photo in 1924. So this is the space that has now become on the right here with the beams, our new collection room. And in 2023, we had to move it all back. But this time we had a 10,000 square foot space that was shared, or is shared currently now, with invertebrate paleontology. And so we had the opportunity to look at the organization and place things in such a way that would be most conducive to our user group. So eventually, we came in with these lovely Delta cabinets on carriages and pallet racking you can access from both sides. It's a beautiful thing. I love it. I love it. But it was not just collections we were moving in this time period. Like I mentioned before, we were moving archives, libraries, laboratories, mounted skeletons. We took everything off display. We also sheltered in place some really large specimens, and also some of the mural work by Zallinger as well had to be protected in situ and monitored by our conservation team. So a little bit about the process. That was the scope. I love this picture here because it shows we used everything we could put our hands on in terms of carts for the swing move. Lots of different push carts, what we called metro carts, that are often used in kitchenware with adjustable shelving, put things on dollies. We had custom built drawer carts that fit about 10 drawers, and they're interchangeable between our divisions. So we really put everything to good use that we could. So about staffing, it really varied between the two moves. On average, I would say we had about 5 people daily. Sometimes it would be 6 or 7 dedicated to the move. We had full-time staff on a temporary basis as far as a term position went, in support of doing all the inventory, housing, and mapping, which was fabulous to have that dedication, because that really allowed for the move to go very smoothly, that things were supported well. And then the timeline here, we did it in about 4 months. Also the second move we did in about 4 months, because we still have fishes to move and sharks, about 90 cabinets left, and that was estimated to be that 5th month. So all in all, it took about the same amount of time for both moves. And what was the process like? We did some supports. Cavity mounts were needed on the top left. On the right, lots of lining of ethifoam, sheeting into trays to prevent rocking and damage. While it wasn't accomplished in this move, we did have a lot of supports that were made in the center here for oversized specimens, which was really pivotal to being able to smoothly shift things onto large racks. We also did barcoding. So we did this at the catalog level and also the drawer level. And a closer snapshot of what this looks like, we had location strings assigned to each unit, and we could then locate an individual specimen in our relational database, EMU, to a given location string, which allowed for us to call up things at that location and batch relocate them to new places physically within the museum, or we could then pull various sorts and pick and choose which specimens we wanted to pull from a given place. So that was really useful. And we used a simple zebra printer to place labels onto magnets. A little bit about the mapping. I use Google Slides, actually. I have 3 minutes. Okay, we'll go along. To help gauge the volume of space that things would occupy. And a little bit on the right is a export of our database when we would pull a pull list of specimens. Doing an inventory of what sort of support equipment you have is really helpful. So here again, we were looking at what types of lifts we had and different types of carts. Pneumatic wheels are fabulous when you're going over uneven terrain or if you have to go outside. Those we put to good use, as well as mechanical and electrical lifts. A bit about just timeline, engaging time. I did presentations to our entire move crew before and after, giving them a heads up, like these are the goals, these are the expectations, this is what you're gonna be achieving as a byproduct of our move, and breaking it down by key drivers and milestones of when we're starting, when we have support staff, when the hard deadlines are that we were meeting. And we track this on a daily basis, very high tech on a whiteboard. And I would just go through for the day as I marked off what we had moved and what we had loaded in and out, and kept record of the statistics there. And it was just a great visual motivator too for our staff to see the progress that we were making. So in conclusion, with a couple minutes I have left, these are just some takeaways from the whole process that I hope can be helpful for you when you're stuck between the ceiling and the pallet rack, as I was, loading something in. How do I get out? You're relying in any move or any project on the work of others. It's very much a team and collaborative process. And so with that in mind, you really do have to be an advocate for the best interests of your collection. And so if you can take that time to ask good questions and find out the people who are really able to move and make modifications, like go for it and do what you can with the people that you have. And that requires a knowledge of who your team is and what their strengths are as well. And then nimbleness was really key. With any project, there's always going to be something unforeseen that you should be counting on. And in this instance, we had an entire building flood. We had HVAC issues. We had carriages that were overweighted, infrastructure that wasn't built to spec. But we were able to pivot on all of those things and incorporate, when we did have downtime, imaging all our oversized specimens, doing cleaning, doing other inventories, and really making use of the time, even if we didn't foresee it to be used as such. And lastly, it's about personnel management. At the end of the day, with our projects, we're hired for our expertise in what we do on a day-to-day basis, but we're really working with people, and keeping them happy and healthy is really important. So last but not least, I want to thank you all for your time. There's a really long list of people that make a process like this happen, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to funnel them.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
If you could go to the mic, that'd be great. Thanks.
I'm sorry, apologies. Could you give us a sense of the size of the collections that you moved overall in terms of the specimen number? And also, did you have a steady, dedicated moving crew? How many people working for how long to accomplish what you did?
Sure. So the first question is the size of the collections. There are 80,000 catalog specimens of vertebrates that I steward, and of those, we moved about 60,000 of them. I still have about 10,000 fishes and sharks to move. So if you want to come to New Haven, we'd be glad to have you. And as far as the second question goes, dedicated personnel, it would be about 5 to 6 people on average per day. We had 2 temporary full-time hires in support for just mapping and inventorying, and that was 2 years prior to our move project, and they've now become central museum assistants that float between divisions and provide support. On a day-to-day basis, realistically, given the tightness of the spaces we were moving in and out of, having a team of 4 people shifting things and 1 person overseeing, I think is really an ideal setup, given the narrowness of our aisles and the distances that we were going.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Laura Abraczinskas, who will be talking on moving forward, temporary relocation of Michigan State University Museum vertebrate collections for a climate-controlled renovation project.
Thank you. The Michigan State University Museum was established in 1857 and houses over 117,000 specimens of vertebrates, including fossils. And while emphasizing the state of Michigan and the Great Lakes region, the collections are worldwide in scope and provide a record of biodiversity that ranges from 1844 to the present. In December of 2023, the Michigan State University Board of Trustees approved an 18-month renovation project to upgrade climate control in the museum building. And this project required that our building be emptied of all contents except for the habitat dioramas and dinosaur skeletal casts that are on exhibit. The vertebrate collections were identified for relocation to 4 temporary destinations, and the majority of our dry specimens were packed and transferred by a collections moving and storage company. These materials were moved to a secure, climate-controlled art storage facility that is located in another state, actually, about 5 hours away from our campus. And these specimens that are stored off-site will be or are inaccessible during the renovation. The moving company for the dry collections, they utilized archival support and packing supplies. These included unbuffered acid-free tissue paper, acid-free boxes, plank foam, Volara foam, cotton twill tape, Tyvek sheeting, polyethylene zip bags, and other supplies. They used a variety of established methods for creating supports and for packing. Here are a couple of images of packing methods. The penguin taxidermy mount on the left had its base secured to a base blue board with tied down with cotton twill tape, and then these specimens were moved into boxes. And the image on the right depicts 2 of our mammal skulls that were packed into cavity mounts, and these skulls were secured within polyethylene plastic bags before being placed in the mounts. And this was to retain any loose pieces or teeth that happened to fall out and kept all the parts together. Our museum's fluid preserve collections were relocated by a different moving company. This company was a technical services vendor that specialized in chemical laboratory packing and moving. And they moved our collections to a space on our campus, approximately 0.8 kilometers from the museum building, or it's about a half a mile, so not very far away. This space had good ventilation and our campus environmental health and safety office and the campus fire marshal provided oversight of our MOVE project and guidance throughout the project. Our frozen tissue collections were also relocated to laboratory space on campus. We were able to acquire a new ultra-cold -80 freezer, and the frozen materials were moved by museum staff. The moving company for the fluid preserved collections, they labeled each glass jar with the corresponding cabinet and shelf number, and they wrapped each jar with bubble wrap. The wrap jars were placed into larger moved containers. These were put onto pallets and moved by vehicle into the new space. We also have some larger containers like barrels and stainless steel tanks, and these were secured and moved also by the company. And in the new space, they unpacked all the jars and placed them back on the corresponding cabinet shelves in our new space. Our third temporary destination involved space for our teaching collections. We have over 2,700 vertebrate specimens that are used for teaching on our campus. They're used every week of the academic year. And these were moved to a laboratory space in a different campus building, but also located 0.8 kilometers or 0.5 miles away from the museum building. And our university movers moved 12 teaching cabinets to the new space. And here are some images of teaching collections in the space. Cabinets, some of our skeletons that had just been moved over, and then boxes that contain collections that were packed into the boxes and moved into the new space. A fourth temporary destination involved specimens that we had designated as sensitive, fragile, important, or needed by staff during the renovation project. And these were moved to a secure climate-controlled office facility located at the edge of our campus. That facility is approximately 6.4 kilometers or about 4 miles from the museum building on the central campus. And the collections materials that went into this space include our type specimens, specimens of extinct or critically endangered species, our egg and nest collections, ivory, rhino materials, as well as specimens that are used in ongoing research by campus faculty. Here are some images of our ivory materials. Our museum has had several elephant skulls and articulated skeletons on exhibit, and these were dismantled. We had the tusks removed by the MOVE company, and the ivory tusks were moved to the destination number 4. Here are some illustrations of just some of the packing and support methods that were used by museum staff. I think this is a hippopotamus skull underneath there, secured with Velara and on a cart that just got moved to our new space. And this image has, it's actually a rhino skull in a cavity mount on plank foam and tied down with twill tape and secured to the cart. So our 18-month renovation project will upgrade climate control for the museum. It includes a comprehensive replacement of the heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, as well as humidity control. And upon completion of the renovations, all of the vertebrate collections will be moved back and reinstalled in the museum building. So I'd like to acknowledge several of the Michigan State University units that supported our project. And thank you very much.
Questions for Laura?
Okay, we do have one question from the virtual audience. Julian wants to know, he says, I'd be curious to know what IPM controls were used to treat wet collection specimens as they were being moved. Things like treated for mold on jars.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, did you do any IPM controls for the wet collections? Like for mold or things like that?
That's a really good question. We did not, but the wet collections had been in a pretty good environment. Actually, that space was somewhat climate controlled, and we have not had a mold problem. And certainly for pests, insect pests rather, aren't really an issue for us in the wet collections. But thank you for the question.
I had a question. Do you have a sense of how many specimens required cavity mounts, and how long did that take?
That's a
to
really good
create?
question. We have in our museum, with a 10-minute presentation, there's just so much more we could have illustrated, but we had entire wall of horns and antlers, maybe around up to 200 specimens, and all of those went into cavity mounts. The mounts were created by the company that had they were great, and they had a team of people who just spent all their time building the mounts and preparing the collections for the move. And they did a really good job. So, thank you. Is that it?
We have time for another question if you have one.
Hi, I'm curious, we don't have packing companies that can do this kind of work in New Zealand where I work. Was there a cost-benefit ratio of doing it in-house versus hiring a company, and what was the difference there?
Are you asking about how we hire the companies? Is that,
Yeah, and what kind of company it was.
So let's talk afterward, but that's just a very interesting question. So maybe with a lot of move projects, decisions get made at other levels, kind of higher up, and even by people outside of the museum. And so at first they just wanted to move all the collections. They were going to just take them all off campus. And then I guess the short story is, then they wouldn't move fluids, so then that became a different vendor. And then we said, well, wait a minute, types, we need all this stuff, we need this stuff for teaching. You can't just take it all away for 2 years or 18 months. And so it just kind of divided off from there. And so then we had to find the space and work with the vendors. And so we actually just finished last Monday. So it's just been a very long road and a very interesting process. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, Laura. I think we have a few minutes just to keep in time with the schedule. So we'll just wait a few minutes till our next speaker. And I will mention that we do have a 15-minute block at the end of the session for extended questions and discussion, so keep thinking on what you want to talk about. All right, our next speaker is Bethany Palumbo with a talk entitled A Mammoth Collaboration, Rebuilding the Conservation Department at the Natural History Museum of Denmark.
How do I? This isn't my talk. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. It's great to see so many lovely, friendly faces. Okay. So the Natural History Museum in Denmark is nearing the end of a major reconstruction project. We are building a new subterranean museum. It's going to showcase 7 new galleries, taking visitors from the Arctic to the deep oceans, all the way into outer space. As part of this redevelopment project, a new conservation department was established to oversee the documentation, preparation, moving, and install of the many thousands of objects that are going on display. When I assumed the role of head of conservation in 2021, there were many parts of the redevelopment project that were not yet finished, including a building under construction, incomplete gallery designs, no object lists, and no showcase designs. I need to emphasize at this point that designing an object list template isn't usually the role of conservation, but we found ourselves getting involved in just about everything in order to get it done in time. And in the spirit of this how-to session, this talk aims to take you on a journey through the steps needed to get objects from collections into exhibitions from a conservation perspective. You may undertake this process differently in your institution, or you may not have even considered it before. It's something new for our museum and for our new conservation department, and we learned a lot in the process. The first task on arrival to Copenhagen was to build a team and prepare our workspace. We had inherited a very large workshop in the old zoological museum, but it had become a dumping ground for decades. New furniture, materials, and equipment was purchased, and the workspace emptied of clutter. I also hired additional team members. Our team started at 3, it's now 7, and it's soon to be 9, in order to get all the work done. We also have a technician on the team, which is especially helpful because he does all the heavy lifting and woodworking, such as crate building, which is something we're not qualified to do, and I recommend it 100%. The next step was to write and standardize the protocols for how objects would move out of collections through conservation and into exhibitions. Yes, objects need conservation treatment, but more importantly, they also need to be adequately documented in this process and have the locations on their journey recorded as is collections best practice. Part of this was devising templates for our conservation documentation. This would be in the form of written visual assessments and detailed photography to record an object on arrival to conservation and its condition before going on display. We opted to write simplified condition assessments as PDFs, creating a different template for each material type. This includes taxidermy, fluid preserved specimens, osteology, dried objects, geology, and minerals. A photography workflow was also written to standardize our photography process to ensure that photographs were always of the same quality. Once we knew we would have a lot of digital documents, our thoughts moved to where we could store these. First, we just assumed we could attach them to the objects in our Specify 7 database, but it won't come as a surprise to any of you that none of these objects were in the database to begin with. In the meantime, we collected our documentation in a shared Microsoft Teams drive while we worked with IT and collections to make a new storage tree in Specify 7. Designing this form, it was important to include all the relevant information, such as common and Latin names, accession numbers, and storage locations. A storage tree keeps everything in a gallery, subsection, and showcase level, and it has space for multiple attachments, as you can see here. It is also a database that everyone can access who is involved in the new exhibition planning. Alongside this effort in the database, we were also struggling to make sense of the object lists. An object list, I would say, is the most essential part of any new exhibition. It provides complete oversight, listing objects by showcase, including photos and measurements. We quickly discovered, though, that different galleries had been using different versions and often through different software. It was complete chaos.
Ideally, an object list template should be written with all stakeholders involved, including collections, conservation, design, and exhibition teams right at the start of the exhibition planning. Because without this input, object lists can sort of take on their own life depending on who's writing it. It also came as a late but wonderful relief to learn that an object list could actually be exported out of Specify 7. So with a combination of this and a few minor edits, we produced a new object list template that was shared and populated by the exhibition teams. With the paperwork mostly in order, it was time to start processing objects. 2 galleries had near finished object lists, so we decided to start there. Before this, though, we needed to check with 98–99% certainty that these were indeed the objects planned for exhibition. A great way to finalize an object list is to undertake an exhibition mock-up. An exhibition mock-up is a crucial part of exhibition planning because it's an opportunity to bring all the objects physically together to see if they A, work as a storyline, if they complement each other, and B, an opportunity to check your object list measurements and make sure that they are correct and that the objects will physically fit inside of the showcase. A mock-up should be conducted with representatives from design, collections, curators, and conservation. It's often the first time, in fact, that the entire team has physically seen the objects. A mock-up isn't relevant for all types of exhibitions, but for large, complicated showcases, I recommend it 100%. You can also complete a mock-up digitally, which gives you a better understanding of how to position objects on display. But this doesn't give you the visual assessment that a physical mock-up does. Finally, it was time for treatments. After a lot of preparatory work, we could get started. Knowing that time indeed was very limited, it was important that we discuss internally our own expectations for treatments. As a baseline, we agreed that treatment would be minimal, such as dry cleaning or transferring fluids into clean jars. More complex treatments, such as restoration, would only happen if there was a visible need, such as a structural repair. It was also important to get curators to approve the treatments we wanted to undertake. Including them in this process-making decision created transparency, and having agreements in writing attached to the specimens in the database would prevent any future misunderstandings. In this process, we also learned that the curators hadn't always been informed of the intended display methods. Will an object be in a showcase or will it be on open display? And unfortunately, this meant that objects were still being pulled from galleries. The next step is the pack-in and planning of the move. All the specimens are ready to be moved out of conservation, but they still need to be stored somewhere safe while we wait to be moved to the new site. Luckily for us, the entire existing zoological museum where the collections are based was permanently closed, and this offered us a sufficient swing space in the old exhibitions. At this point in time, objects have only been packed for short-term storage. We plan to start moving objects next year, and this will involve more detailed packing methods, as well as hiring specialist movers for heavy objects and fluids. And I'm sure I'll be reaching out to all of you for advice on that front. So it's time for some reflection. At the stage in this project, there's still a lot of unknowns, but we have to keep moving forward because we still have hundreds of objects to process through exhibition for conservation. The constant need to adapt, although exhausting, has given us a lot of time for reflection of how to make this process more linear. I work better with pictures, so here is a spaghetti picture of how the last 2 years have gone. Moving from left to right is the journey of time. The items in yellow are some of the tasks that we were either responsible for or just took on in order to get them completed. Pink are some of the interesting realizations from the exhibition teams. And the blue items are very important management-led milestones that just came too late in the process, such as mount making and the final showcase sizes. But let's redo this flowchart to demonstrate a more effective route this journey could have taken. This shows more clearly the steps needed to get objects through conservation, and all of them are crucial. Only once steps 1 through 5 are completed can treatment actually start. So with all of this in mind, here are some of the main observations and recommendations that we learned from this experience. 1, before you start planning an exhibition, you need to clarify who is responsible for what, as Vanessa already mentioned. This needs to be a written document that can be referred to. It might be clear to museums that have completed this process before, but for others, this is completely new, and it needs to be defined and agreed in advance. Step 2, if you're planning a new exhibition, then it's paramount that conservation is involved from the first discussions. Conservators can assess objects quickly for display suitability and will know how much resource is required to make an object presentable for display. 3, when you add these objects to your database, please make sure the naming systems are concrete, because changing gallery names and showcase numbers halfway through the documentation process means having to go back and change things manually or risk objects and records not matching up. 4, your object lists need to be standardized and useful to all stakeholders, from curators right through to installation staff. We don't need Latin names or collection locations, field locations. What we do need are showcase numbers, material types, common names, and photographs for easy identification by everyone involved in making the exhibition. 5, putting your object list together means getting curatorial approval for object use, but also make it clear to them how you plan to display your objects. Curators also need to approve any conservation treatments. That way there won't be any surprises later. And 6, once you've selected your objects, complete an exhibition mock-up, ideally physically, because this provides you with a chance to really see your objects and not just a picture. You may find they aren't even suitable for exhibition. This is also the chance to discuss display requirements with conservation and finalize showcase sizes. And yes, we all know that exhibitions have changes and flexibility is key, but it's really important for the mental health and well-being of your colleagues to ensure that changes are reasonable and discussed in a transparent way. So in conclusion, we're now halfway through this preparation period. We finally have procedures and agreed routines that allow objects to be brought out of conservation and delivered to out of collections and delivered to conservation in a way that is we can record them accurately on their journey to exhibition. And we continue to streamline these processes, but we're happy with the progress that we've made. And by standardizing our conservation effort, it's enabled us to maintain a fast work pace while upholding realistic expectations. Thank you so much for listening. I'd also like to give a big thanks to my conservation team, with whom none of this project would exist. And thank you so much to the conference organizers for putting on this lovely conference. Thank you.
Do we have questions for Bethany? Questions from the chat?
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll pause for a couple minutes until the next presentation. We do have.
I had a question. Bethany, this was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I have a quick question. What recommendation would you give for museums that don't have conservators?
You know what? I thought that might come up and I wrote that down. Because that's very, I mean, I worked in natural history museums for 14 years, and it's very rare to even find a natural history museum with a conservator. I wrote down, you know what I wrote? Hire one. At least, that's it. That's it. But at least in a consultancy capacity. There are plenty of freelance conservators who would be willing to help and advise. And also within Spinach, there's a big group of conservators, and I'm sure we'd be willing to volunteer our time to help you too. So.
How do you convince your administration to hire a conservator?
That's the question. I don't think I can answer that. No, by just advocating for collections and demonstrating what happens when that, I mean, my presentation was full of what happens if conservation isn't involved from the get-go. We've had so many changes, staff changes, frustrations. It's just, this process could be a lot easier and a lot cheaper if conservation is involved from the start. So, and yeah, you can always get Spinach to, we can always write you a letter of advocacy too. So come on, let's use each other. Great, thank you so much, everyone.
All right, I'd like to welcome our final presenter. Oops, I lost this thing. Sorry, I lost my little picture here. Yuanhao Zhang, an attempt to evaluate the lighting quantity indexes of museum lighting for specimen protections. Thank you.
Okay, greetings everyone. I'm a first-year PhD student at Hokkaido University, and I'm doing the research about the humanity and human science, especially in the Natural History Museum in Japan. And well, I'm honored to present my former research on the attempt to evaluate the light inequality for the specimen collections. And well, lighting is really crucial for the showing cases exhibit, highlighting the shape, the texture, the color of the collection. However, it could be one of the reasons that it causes the discoloration and fading. So with the advancement of the light technology, I think many of the museums are shifting from the traditional light to the LEDs or even more advanced lighting resource. Well, typically the LEDs are preferred because they consume less energy and they give off less UV lights. And that could be some of the reason that makes the collection fades. But well, according to some of the research, that even with the visual light resource, it can make the collection fade. So for the better conservation purpose, and I like to know how it would fade and like with a certain amount of time of the illumination, to what extent will the collection fade. But before dipping into the fading process, I want to discuss about the importance of color in collection. Well, usually for the artworks and for the history object, the color conveys the design, the originality, and the artistry. But sometimes, well, most of the time they are valued and well preserved for the purpose to show the originality. But scientists also have been studied about the light-induced damage on the artworks to protect and manage the fading process. We're providing scientifically supported guidelines for the museum. But in natural history collection colors, the color carried the really eccentric biology information. Well, for example, the picture here is it should be a pink and colored collection, but they fade into white over time. So from the perspective of a visitor, they may perceive that, okay, this is a white bug. So obviously, museums don't want to convey the kind of wrong information to the visitors. So I think we need to think carefully whether we want to exhibit this kind of already faded collection to the visitors. So when it comes to the museum guideline for lighting, well, this is an example I extracted from the guideline of selecting solid state lighting for museum. The collection are often grouped into 4 categories, like they will be high, middle, or low, or no sensitive to the light at all. But natural history collection usually, however, often broadly classified as high sensitive without consideration of the diversity of the species, and they could be very different in material and structure. So for example, in this guideline, the insect structure color are classified to be low sensitive, while the fur and the feather fall under the middle sensitive. Well, through technically, it could be correct. These standards, I still feel they are based on the research of colored art project, not the natural history specimen themselves. And they do lack of enough information for the natural history collections. So with this guideline, museum can create light and exhibition plan. However, the information is lacking, so curators are often relying on their own knowledge and experience, which is, well, valuable, I think, but sometimes they must make decisions based on their eccentric, and sometimes in Japan, there are museums with natural history collection, but without natural history curators. So it could be a real problem that they don't have any of knowledge or any of the expertise to make the decision. So this lead to my idea to conduct an experiment and with the help of the University Museum. Well, my aim was to gather empirical evidence on the stabilities of structure colors compared to the pigment color of the natural history collection. So I've been picking up a group of 4 kinds of collections, and I conducted an experiment using these. Well, 2 with pigment color and 2 with structure color. These were exposed to different light intensity from 0, which is totally dark, to 200 lux, and a color control. Well, the zero lux was just for the control group, and they were keeping in the same environment for about 4,300 hours, 300 to 20 hours. But the lux is the unit of the illuminance. And the experiment took place actually in the exhibition room of the University Museum. So to be honest, I doubt that the outcome of the experiment, because visitors coming to put their hands on the experiment and they open the window so that light from the outside came in. Well, this is just the design of the experiment and how it looks like in the real exhibition room. And I've been using really handy price spectrometer and colorimeters to collect the data. And this is just the spectrum of the light. I use a typical light resource for the museums, and this is the spectrum of them. And finally, I need to calculate how different they are. So I've been using the equation given by the CIE lab, which is the International Commission of the Illumination. So we have three parameters, which is the L stands for the lightness, and A and B stands for how green or red and blue or yellow they tend to look like. And with the equation in the middle, we can get a final number to indicate how it changed. Well, there may be other industrial standards or experimental standards, but in my case, I would take, if it's 0 to 2, it slightly change, and if it's 2 to 4 to 5, it has a noticeable change. And if it's from 5 to 15, well, it's moderately changed. So the outcome of the experiment, I try to process the data with a math lab. So this is the butterfly with the pigment color. You can see from the beginning to the end, it changed a lot, and the color differences reach almost to 16. And this is the butterfly with this is the grasshopper. It barely changed for the reason that it has been already changed a lot from the time that they have been made into specimens. So maybe this is the wrong choice of the experiment sample. And this is the butterfly with the color structure, and the maximum of change of color only reached no more than 3. So which is, this is agreement with my consumption that the structure color won't fade that much. And this is the battles I tried to collect the data from, but not the surface of this type of specimen, they are not flattened and they're like semi-sphered. So it's really hard to to measure the data from the equipment I have. And in the attempt to like observe the change in the pigment color under the structural color for the structural color group with a thin film to be applied on the optical device, well, it's helped to eliminate the polarized light. However, the data I collected, well, to me, it showed no significant change. Well, luckily due to the experimental setup, it's not applicable for the natural history collections. And I hope, well, this is sound like for my own defense, because I've been studying in the graduate school of humanities, and the budget for this scientific research is really limited. And to conclude, this experiment was conducted in an exhibition room with not really perfect environment and equipment. So the results aren't really quantitatively precise, but however, the aim was to observe the general trends and collect the information, collect the empirical evidence for museum. And I think it is essential to monitor and record color change with reliable data rather than just rely on solely on visual observation or with you taking a photo with that, with the lighting change, the color will change in the photo. So it could be more reliable if you use some colorimeters to help to decide whether it have changed or whether it have to change to the extent that you really want to exchange the exhibited object. So, and I think it can help predict how long it will take for the collection to reach an acceptable levels of change. So on personal perspective of that, like conducting this kind of experiment in the experiment room was really thought-provoking experience, not just because for myself, but for the visitors. I noticed that some visitors have appreciated the effort and commenting online how the museum take the collection seriously, especially the natural history collection, where they think, okay, just the bugs flying over there is not important like that. By showing the altitude that we really want to preserve that by this kind of experimental exhibition is really rewarding for me as a humanities research. And yeah, thank you for your attention and look forward to discussing further with those of you who really work closely with collection. Yeah, thank you. Any questions?
All right, if there are no questions, thank you so much. So we have time now for extended Q&A. I believe all of our speakers are still present, so if you've been sort of percolating on some questions, they're here to answer them. And then this being a Skillshare, we do invite you to, I know many of you have probably connect with the themes of interpreting tricky labels, moving collections, conserving collections, or wondering about exhibit parameters. So, you know, if you have experiences with any of these themes, challenges you've encountered, questions you have, tips you want to share, or, you know, favorite resources that have really helped you, we'd all be interested in hearing.
I have a question for you. Yeah. Could you go to the mic to answer though? If that's okay. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I was really, we have the same problem with cursive script. I think probably all of us have that problem. And I was wondering, in the United States, there's sort of an age gap where if you're under a certain age, they don't teach it in school anymore. And I was wondering if that's the same, if you have the same experience, if you have students who are younger than a certain age that can't read the cursive script.
Yeah, it's the same situation. Yeah, and also I learned the ancient document now, but when I was a student or more younger, I didn't learn about that. And also, I learned the ancient document, Japanese ancient documents. I forget the English now. Sorry, my poor English skills, but it's a really big problem. So if I try to collaborate with the university student, but the university student cannot read or cannot completely read these levels. So yeah, it's very difficult.
Awesome, thanks. Anybody else have cursive problems? Yeah, okay. Crazy. Yeah. Okay, I have another question, but not related to cursive.
I have one cursive comment. I think some people have found success in having retired volunteers sort of bridge that gap, because I know many of us have sort of younger volunteers or students working in collections, so that's a workaround that will last for a few decades. And I believe I've heard of people creating thesauri, at least of certain collectors' handwriting. And so if there's a way to sort of kind of pool those resources for some of those naturalists that a lot of collections might share, that could also be something to think about.
Just confirm that we had a retired special collections librarian that worked for me, and she was in her 70s, and she was doing cataloging, but every once in a while I would be like, hey, Kathy, can you come look at this on my computer really quick? And she would interpret some cursive for me. And we also, so Junius Henderson, who Emily and I both have a lot of his handwriting in our collections, we've kind of tried to do that. Like, you can tell he very specifically does certain letters certain ways, and that's been really helpful for trying to interpret his handwriting. So yeah. Okay, I have another question unless somebody else has a question. Sorry. I had a question for those of you doing moves. How did you negotiate your swing space? Because that's a big problem we have on our campus, and our campus actually wants us to pay rent on other campus spaces for swing space or off-site, like other storage on campus. And I was curious how other people negotiated that.
You want me to go up here? Am I okay here? Okay. At Michigan State University, we obviously have 3 campus spaces, and we have a space office that manages and assigns all of the space. So it was a challenge, but they came through. We didn't have to pay anything, but all of our space is issued temporarily. So we don't really, like, it isn't really ours, like we're in it, but like an air conditioner doesn't work, and it's just sort of complex as far as how do we even get that fixed and who pays for it. So this is another sort of aspect with moves where you do have temporary space, or you just have to kind of deal with things in the interim. And again, for my job, I'm the collections manager for all the vertebrates. And so I'm going to be working in like 3 different, I have an office in one building. I have to go pack teaching collections in another building. And if anyone needs fluids or frozen materials, I got to meet them in yet another building. So the next, for me anyway, the next 18 months, or probably will really be 2 years, things seem to always take a little bit longer with construction. So, but I do know for an R move, there were also labs that had to move. The paleo lab moved. All the office furniture, our libraries, I mean, there was a lot to it. And I know for some of the office furniture, if that didn't fit in a certain place, there is a campus office that stores that, and they have to like palletize all of the desks and furniture, and then someone has to pay for that, or the museum has to pay for that. So, but for other spaces, anyway, I wish you luck with that. But it is an issue with the swing space. So can I ask a question of everyone in the room, and in particular people involved with moves? Bethany, I really appreciated the line item on your slide about mental health and talking, and you too, Vanessa, with communicating at all levels, and also being flexible. So I just wondered, do you have any other comments about that, or does anyone want to speak about the importance of that, or follow up? It just seems to be a really critical aspect with the move. And what I mentioned a little bit in my talk, there was sort of this hierarchy with decisions and funding, and even the companies doing the construction, they're at a different level. And so sometimes, it's probably true of any large project, where just maybe the communication lines maybe aren't as open as they should be, or the information doesn't get passed along like it should. So I just wondered if anyone had other comments about that, or, thank you.
Yeah, my comment on that is just basically, don't expect to be invited. Like, you have to invite yourself. And we found that a lot in our project, especially because we're a new conservation department coming into a museum that hasn't really had conservation before. A lot of staff still have a very either an old perception of what that is, or they just don't really know. So I've had to really invite myself to things a lot, just because I don't think people aren't, those meetings that are happening higher up. So yeah, that's what I would advocate, is just keep your ear to the ground and just try and get involved in as much as you can, because otherwise your team, if you're not getting the information, there's no way that your team are going to know what's going on either. So.
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, and I think it's often glossed over. So much of the focus is on the technical aspects of a move or any particular project, and it's really the people that are making it happen at the end of the day. And to value and acknowledge and listen to people's feedback is really critical. I would say probably the most useful thing that I found was defining expectations at the start of the project as much as you can. I tend to be very detailed as a person, so I will over communicate and provide information that people don't really need to know for action, but it gives them a sense of the bigger picture and how they play a role in that, and elevates their contributions in such a way that there is value in what they're doing. I think over time too, you're pulling in people who might be very skilled in other ways, and what you may be asking of them at the time may not really fully allow them to flourish or demonstrate all of those things. But as long as they have a clear grasp of what's being asked of them, that's really helpful. I think probably the most challenging, though, in all honesty, for the project that we did, was the personnel management. The move is technical, it's challenging, you can figure it out, but it's controlling expectations and making sure that you're motivating a team that's unified when there's a lot of stress going on and there's a lot of information that floats, and people share things, and it gets taken out of context, and you're constantly trying to mitigate that, and it can be a big challenge. So I think the health mentally of your staff is really paramount, and also sheltering them from some things too. There are certain things that you can address without having to complain or involve people in, and that can really spare a lot of anxiety for the crew moving forward. So yeah, I think also having feedback, there was so much I could have shared. I could have been an hour for this talk, but having weekly or scheduled check-ins for feedback from everyone is really critical. And even if you don't follow through with the suggestions that people are making, at least acknowledging it and making an attempt to integrate change, I think is really helpful through the process, that you're not so rigid that you can't be flexible.
Yeah, I'd also like to echo Laura's sentiment there. Vanessa, I was really happy to see connecting people to the big picture. I think this is true of moves, but really many museum tasks can be really repetitive and tedious, and really reminding technicians like why this is important. You know, we're archiving life on Earth, or this is enabling research, and what their contributions really enable.
I will also say, I think the mental health aspect is really big like we had a big flood in our museum a couple years ago that I presented on last year. And I agree like with what you guys said, like communication is key. And so I kind of took over I was the building proctor at the time. So I was sending emails to a lot of our folks because it happened over Christmas and New Year's. And so a lot of people were out of town, and just like communicating to our curators who might not be there, or like we had one curator that was in Argentina, and just, you know, people were like really appreciative of having that bigger picture, and just like, okay, thank you for letting us know what's going on. Like we feel helpless, like we can't be there. So the communication is really key. The other thing I think is really key, I don't know, I'm really food motivated. So like we set up sort of in a classroom and had tons of snacks, and we had a curator that was designated to go, you know, like one of our curators was just like, I'm bringing Cheetos and Coke because I know you like Cheetos and Coke. And somebody else went and got burritos for everybody one day. But it was nice just to have a space where like people could like sit and kind of like decompress a little bit and have a snack and like kind of reset before they went back to like having to triage collections and moves and cabinets and archives and reprints and all the things that we were trying to salvage from that disaster. So that was another thing I think, I don't know, I think food helps to motivate people and keep people's mental health going.
I was curious, how many of you have been involved in moves? Yeah, someone mentioned too, taxonomic reorganization. How many of you have sort of taken the opportunity to either, you know, update the physical organization of your collections, or some of the value add-ons like doing conservation, you know, prior to moving, or IPM, you know, freezing collections as they're moving spaces, or even imaging, you know, quick and dirty imaging. And do you feel like, obviously that adds quite a bit of time, and so do you feel like that was worth it? Were there challenges? Are you seeing all the benefits come to fruition?
Sorry, I'm not going to answer your question, but I have another question. Just about inventory moves in general, and yours might be too recent to comment, but I was interested in using barcodes and new technologies, doing inventory after the move, noticing how many errors there had been, because even doing inventory without a move can bring up a lot of issues, and I'm wondering what you encountered when doing this move, because on paper it won't work how it happens in real life.
Countless. It's like, where do you begin? I think it's really eye-opening to see when you do a move, you get to intimately know the needs of a particular collection, and it allows you to prioritize things in an achievable way, to say, okay, this portion I can address at this point in time, and other things I'm going to have to consider a grant or a larger team. For our purposes, I came from the LA County Museum, where it was geochronostratigraphically arranged, to get into your question a little bit. And I've just found that much more convenient for browsing. With EL's arrangement, it's systematic. And my curator was like, oh, he was also from Berkeley. He's like, I would love for this to be geochronostratigraphically arranged. Can you achieve that? And I was like, oh, let me look at the data. And it would just be too immeasurable to do in my lifetime, honestly, to do it completely and accurately. And the validity and the fidelity of the locality data, it just isn't there with some of these historical collections to be able to address it in a consistent way. So as far as errors and things that came up with the actual locating and inventory after the work. So a lot of the inventory work was done beforehand to account for where things were. This is great for catalog materials, but for things that are uncatalogued, unprocessed, problematic, it can be a challenge to get a good grasp of the volume of what that is and just sporadically how changed it is. So with our pull list, like I did it on Google Sheets so I could just change it really easily because it was on a day-to-day basis that I was modifying the instructions I was giving to the team the next day. But the actual location was done after the fact for our final move to be able to address things and pull up issues because we were pulling from different places to improve the taxonomic flow and arrangement where we could, where we had the time to do it in areas that were particularly problematic or where before there was just no space. And so things were very disparate in their organization, and now to put them in a continual sequence was going to be much more beneficial, so I wouldn't have to move things more than once. Ideally, you still have to move them again. So there's that. For our collections too, I'll say with the locating, it can be a challenge. There's different approaches to this, but one approach that was implemented before I onboarded was to split catalog records to account for things that are physically stored in different places and to retain that history of movement. And that can be a challenge to rectify when you're dittoing records and issues get edited by different people over time and the history of that specimen changes in terms of taxonomy updates and so forth to apply those changes uniformly across all the dittoed records. So that's another thing that I think introduced some error that's going to take some time on my end to sort out. And a lot of that probably could have been prevented by training on the front end, but I jumped the project in the middle. So, there's those sorts of things, but there's always going to be errors too in the cataloging approach. In our collection, there's numerous instances where a given catalog number applies to multiple individuals of different taxa, and they're all types or published in the literature. And so teasing that out with letter suffixes and number suffixes can be a real challenge. So it's just a matter of identifying where that is, and the extent of it, and also kind of the nature of what tasks would need to be done to achieve it. And then that can help you prioritize the type of personnel to put on the project so you're matching expertise with the need of the project. So I hope that's a little helpful.
Great, thanks. It looks like it's time for our morning tea. So I do want to mention a group chat has been created in Oxford Abstracts for the session. So if you'd like to continue the conversation, please check it out. And just a final thank you for joining us and to all of our speakers.
Nice to, build a building. Oh, wouldn't it be?